Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Ryan A. McDade. I am the co-founder and CEO of Apple of His Eye. We're a faith-based nonprofit organization here in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we specialize in providing community-based mental health education as well as wraparound supportive services for individuals and families living with persistent mental health conditions and or dealing with homelessness. In addition to our regular programming, Apple of His Eye is bringing you all a mini documentary elevating African American voices in the mental health space. We hope with this video that it will also provide effective coping mechanisms and strategies for individuals that are dealing with just everyday life stressors. Before we get into the content, I also want to acknowledge our funders, Prevention First. If anyone would like any more information about this organization, please feel free to check out the links at the end of the video. Thank you and stay tuned.
Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. My name is Simone Bolar, and I am also an intern with Apple of His Eye. And today I am joined with
Dr. Roxana Holland.
Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate that. Before we go ahead and get started, would you mind giving us some background information about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Roxana Holland. I have a doctorate in social work from the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. I also have my master's degree in social work from the University of Louisville. I've been practicing as a clinical social work since about really the last decade, so since about 2013. And my specialty as far as clinical practice is addiction in the recovery process. I still work clinically, but I also am an assistant professor of social work at Mount St. Joseph University. And that gives me the honor and privilege of cultivating young minds in the social work industry and our next professionals that are coming.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. So as you know, July is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. And ever since the COVID-19 pandemic, mental health awareness has been in the forefront of many different conversations. With marginalized groups, especially the African American community.
Absolutely.
So, leading into that, Dr. Holland, how do you personally perceive the stigma that surrounds mental health within the African American community?
Yeah, so everybody is facing stigma whenever it comes to mental health, but I think there are some unique characteristics whenever it comes to the Black or African American community. And I think really that's twofold. I think we have the intersectionality of characteristics about ourselves that we honor, which we inherently embody this strength, this resilience of being able to overcome oppression and all of these issues, right? And just put it on my back and I'll just wear it, right? I got it. It's okay.
Right.
And then also on the other hand is really how much faith is a part of our root system. But at the same time, that's not a negative thing, but I also think that there is this belief that mental health is something that could be prayed away, that we should just be relying on faith walk and pastoral care. And I just need to get into my word more and that will solve these problems. And so I think this is really twofold, right? I am strong. And if I am strong, I should then be able to deal with X, Y, and Z, right? And because I'm a believer, then my God should be able to shore me up in this area.
Right.
And if I seek help, then am I not strong? And do I not believe in an all-knowing God? And I think that really, right, those points where we really is really how we identify ourselves a lot, speaking generally about the Black community, then what does that mean about if I seek help? Right? Is my God not big enough? Am I not strong enough?
Right.
Or is it actually you've been strong for too long?
Right.
And that's why we've gotten to the place that we are. And that God has gifted people to look at our physical health. And he has also gifted people to look at our mental health as well.
That was a really great and insightful answer. And I can't wait for people to hear this. So going on that perception of this stigma, do you feel like there's a difference between men and women when it comes to this stigma of mental health?
I think that we deal with it in different ways, right?
Okay.
I think that toxic masculinity really impacts Black men, the ability to be saying that I need help. Right? Women are very communal. We go to people and we talk about our issues. Where are Black men going? Right? We know barbershop talk is a huge thing, right? But where are we going as Black men? Do they have this safe space to go to each other and say, I'm overwhelmed, right? I'm struggling, right? I'm having X, Y, and Z issue. Do they actually have that there? I think that shows up there for them, is that they lack the community space to have transparent and vulnerable conversation. And again, we're strong men, so we just shoulder up and we just wear it. And so I think for women, it shows up as this hyper independence that shows up, right? Is I have to do everything by myself. I've got it. I've been doing this by myself for so long, right? That we then have to almost question these core characteristics about ourselves, right? How am I supposed to come to her and say, I'm drowned in here, right? When really the reality is we're drowning too.
That was a very insightful answer. Thank you so much, Dr. Holland.
Of course.
So how would you describe the systematic barriers and systemic racism and discrimination on the mental health in the African American community within the United States?
So I'm gonna. Are you ready? Right?
I'm ready.
Is I think that we have to realize that systemic racism is a byproduct of white supremacy culture. We cannot talk about racism or systematic oppression without saying that these are byproducts of a bigger issue, which is white supremacy, right? And so what does that look like for mental health? A lot of times when we think about mental health, we think about, as a clinician, the DSM, or this list of diagnosing, these list of symptoms. Most of the time, these symptoms are not developed by groups of diverse peoples, right? These symptoms, are they representative of a diverse population? What depression may look like for someone who is African American, the word choices that I may use to describe the issues that are going on with me may be very different than my white counterpart, right?
Yes.
And we know that there has been historical distrust that has happened within the medical community because of white supremacy, that they have misused the Black body without its consent. And so there is mistrust embedded in that interaction that goes on. And so I think that we have to acknowledge that the very book that therapists use, whoever is doing it, to work with a populace who has mental health issues may not actually be representative of the symptoms that an individual who is not from white majority culture would actually have. And then when we look at the way we treat it, or what we call evidence-based practices, right? Research has been done on cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT, motivational interviewing, EMDR, all of these things. But has the research been done on how African American or Black individuals respond to that form of treatment? So there is an assumption that because it works for whiteness, it will work for all people. And that's not true, right? And until we have research that actually says this is what is effective with the Black population, this is what is effective with our Native Americans, this is what's effective with our First Nations people, or whoever, what we are doing and saying because it works for white, it must be right.
So knowing your background, Dr. Holland, with being a therapist and being an advocate for the African American community, you deal with a whole bunch of stressors, not even just from yourself, but from other people. What would you say would be some effective coping mechanisms that people can use to de-stress?
I think it's really important that we define a difference between self-care. It's become this new hot word, and self-soothing. A lot of things that we think are self-care are actually self-soothing. The bath, right? I'm stressed out from work, and so I'm going to go self-soothe by taking the bath, right? Self-care is the chronic investment into self, not a response to a stressor. So I go and deposit into me by reading non-trauma books, right? And that is why I'm depositing into myself. I run not because I'm stressed out, not because I'm having anxiety or something like that, but that's just the way I regularly deposit into me, versus the ways that I self-soothe are going to be very different.
So in your response, at one point you touched on therapy. Could you give us some insight about how important it is to be able to find a good fit therapist for yourself?
Everyone is going to be different, right? Because I'm a straight shooter. Right. I'm a straight shooter. So when I'm looking for a therapist, I need someone who is going to be able to deal with that. Right. And if that is something that's going to make them uncomfortable, we're not going to be a great fit. I'm going to call white supremacy out when white supremacy is present. If that is going to make that therapist uncomfortable, we're not going to be a great fit. But I think what people have to realize that is so important is that you are paying them. This is not a romantic relationship. If you don't like them or they are not, it's not a good fit. You just say, you know what? I really, I appreciate your time, but I think I'm looking for somebody different. They are not, their feelings aren't going to be hurt. Okay. Right. They are not the authority in the room. The expert in the room is you. And so that you have the right to say, I feel like I've been showing up and I'm not making as much progress. Do you think we could change some things up? There is some very essential benefits to having individuals who physically look like you as your provider. However, Blackness is not monolithic. Just because your Black experience looked the way yours did does not mean that that's how I have experienced Blackness. We could be from two different parts of the country.
So, Dr. Holland, as we conclude and wrap up this interview, are there any key takeaways that you want to give our listeners and our audience?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that we know that it is never too late to ask for help or to get involved in your healing process, but also to recognize that we are not defined by how much we can hold, right? And that we don't go through the healing process to increase how much we can hold, but rather to experience more joy, to create the capacity and the margin in our life to feel happiness, to explore the whole spectrum of emotion that is available to us to live wholly as people. And so I think that strength is not inherent because we are Black. Are we strong? Yes, but our strength comes from the collective sorrow and the collective joy that we have with each other. And so I would really advocate that there is no wrong point in life to go and begin your healing process. And we all have that to go through.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Simone Bolar, and today I am joined with
Samuel.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us. So before we start, would you like to share some background information about yourself for the audience?
Sure. So again, my name is Samuel Fowler, born and raised here in Cincinnati, Ohio. Went over to Mount St. Joe University, where I received my undergrad in sport management. Then I went over to Xavier, received my master's in education and coaching education and athlete development. I currently serve as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Coordinator for Hamilton County Developmental Disability Services. And I'm also a visiting professor at Xavier University in Sport Administration. Outside of work, I enjoy mentoring and coaching African-American athletes. I'm the head track and field coach at Northwest High School, and I truly love and passionate about developing athletes. So that's kind of what I do in my spare time.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. So as you know, July is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. And ever since the COVID-19 pandemic, mental health awareness has been in the forefront of a lot of different conversations with marginalized groups, especially within the African American community. So Samuel, how do you personally perceive the stigma that surrounds mental health within the African American community?
I think the stigma on mental health in the African American community is very prevalent. I think African Americans are raised to believe that you don't need therapy. There ain't nothing wrong with you, right? Mm-hmm. Especially growing up in a Black household, right? You hear that all the time. Suck it up. You're okay. So I think the stigma is we have this idea that we don't need to seek help, right? We can deal with our issues on our own. So that's how I view the stigma on the African American community.
Okay. So do you feel like this perception of this stigma varies from men to women?
Yes and no. I think with women, it's almost this idea you have to be a strong Black woman, right? Mm-hmm. It's almost a badge of honor to carry your traumas and get through it, right? I'm strong because I experienced X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. Where with Black men, our experiences are a lot different than Black women, right? We deal with the pressures of society. Being Black, right? You're going to work, you have to code switch as a man all the time, right? You don't want to come across as this aggressive Black male, right? And a lot of times we're hiding our insecurities, our struggles, our traumas every day. So I think they're the same, but they're a little different because as a black man, I'm carrying a different type of weight than a black woman would carry.
So could you touch on what stressors you feel that a lot of people in the African American community deal with on a daily basis?
Oh, yeah. So I can speak personally from my experience, right? When I was a college student, freshman in college, my then girlfriend, she's now my wife, she got pregnant, right? So the first thing that came to my mind were the stressors of, man, I'm going to be a young black man. I don't really have a job to, support my family. I'm going to be a statistic, right? So I'm dealing with all these stressors and I'm hiding it. And the only way I felt like I can deal with it was I got to find a job. I got to figure out a way to make money. Right. How I'm going to tell my parents, right? Those sorts of things. And that's just one small example, right? As an adult and as a married man now, and I have 3 kids, right? You deal with the stressors of, how do I grow professionally to make more funds for my family, right? Because, don't forget, you're black in America, right? You didn't start off ahead, right? You have to kind of find your way. You have to, in a sense, get it out the mud, right?
So what do you feel like, in a generalized way, for people within the African American community would be some good coping mechanisms that they can use to de-stress and relieve anxiety?
So I'll say church home. So I grew up in a church home. So having a faith base, that foundation to me helps tremendously. And when I say that, having a spiritual connection, right? Your God might not be my God, right?
Sure.
By having that spiritual connection, it helps us give us that foundation to start with, right? Growing up, I had a praying mama. So when you're going through a lot, you better pray, or I'm sure she was praying for me when I was out doing whatever I was doing, right? But that foundation gives you help. In a sense, God is my therapist, right? I'm talking to him throughout my day. That gets me through. So to me, that's one. 2 is just being healthy. I think working out, eating right is major. And I think that's something that I try to preach to my athletes, and to the young men and women that I mentor. Being physically healthy is very important because it helps you cope with a lot of things, stress and those sorts of things. And then also just having a good circle of friends.
Do you feel like therapy would be a good outlet for some people when it comes to coping?
Absolutely. And I'll be a little bit transparent right now. So last year I lost my mom. And it was hard for me. I'm the baby of a lot of kids. And my mom was my heart. So, when I lost her, I tried to deal with her death just being busy. I picked up more at work. I tried to take on more projects. I got super active in my fraternities. And that's when I started coaching. I just got super busy. And for me, it was just hiding. Like I wasn't ready to grieve my mom's death. My sister got a therapist. My nephew got a therapist. Everyone else got a therapist, and they're doing fine. And me, I'm like, I'm just busy. So they asked me, like, how you doing? I'm like, I'm good, man. But I got this going on, Well, just recently, everything died down. So now it's almost like I'm forced to grieve now.
Right.
And this is a whole year later, where I didn't want to talk about it to nobody. And now is the first time, it's been a year where I'm like, I think I need a therapist because there's a lot I just need to talk about. So I think having therapy is very important.
Samuel, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for being vulnerable with us, especially when talking about the experience with the loss of your mom. And I am so sorry for your loss. But as we conclude this interview, do you have anything else that you would like to give to the audience? Any key takeaways?
Absolutely. One thing I would like to share, if you don't hear anything I said today, understand with mental health, the importance of self-care. Self-care is very important. I think self-care is kind of what helps me a lot. And when I say self-care, it looks like many different things, but the biggest thing is setting up boundaries. Boundaries is a huge component of self-care, and setting boundaries with your work, even with your family, right? I'm not necessarily saying cut people off, but you have to protect your inner peace, your mental well-being. And I think having that self-care and looking at self-care holistically will definitely help you. So if you don't take anything away, please take that away.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tajay Whitehead, and I'm an intern with Apple of His Eye. And today we are joined with...
My name is Ralph Allen.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ralph Allen. Before we get started, would you mind telling us a bit more background about yourself?
Of course I can. So my name is Ralph Allen. I am originally from Dayton, Ohio. I went to Trotwood Madison High School, and I graduated from Trotwood Madison High School in 2010. I decided to come here to Cincinnati to play football for the College of Mount St. Joseph. I graduated college with a bachelor's in social work in 2014. And in this time, I was applying for jobs. No one was returning my calls or emails. And in 2015, I got a reply from Hamilton County Jobs and Family Services. So I started working for them. I realized that I really enjoyed being a caseworker or a social worker. And in 2019, so 4 years later, I became a manager. I have been a manager ever since, and I really love my job. So I've been here in Cincinnati since 2010, and I plan on staying here for a while.
Thank you, and congratulations on all your achievements with HCJFS.
Thank you.
So as you know, it is July, which is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. And especially since the COVID-19 pandemic, fortunately, mental health has finally come to the forefront of a lot of conversations, especially in regards to the African-American community and their mental health. So in your own words, how do you perceive the stigma surrounding mental health in the African-American community?
So in my words, unfortunately, I have to agree with the stigma. It's not a great agreement, but it is what it is kind of situation. For years and historically, the African-American community has not taken mental health serious. Young men, young Black men are always told, suck it up, get over it, toughen up, when in reality, they're hurting on the inside, and we have to put on the front, and we've been putting on the front for years, because just if we show weakness, then we're soft. Same thing with young women. Their mental health has not been taken serious for a long time as well. So that's where we're at. I think that we're taking great strides in getting rid of that stigma. But as far as the stigma, it is true. And it's just something that we continuously work on.
Yes, thank you. So in regards to systemic racism, obviously this is a very hefty topic.
It is.
How do you feel systemic racism specifically impacts the mental health of the African-American community?
Where do I start? I think systemic racism starts at birth. It's where you're raised. It's what community you're a part of. It all has to do with the resources you even start out with. Someone in Price Hill is going to have less resources than someone in Indian Hill. And that's just where it starts.
What do you feel are some other main stressors that impact the community and the mental health of the African-American community?
Jobs and resources. Absolutely. I think financial stability is a main thing. People of color feel they need to do things and just being transparent, illegal, in order to create revenue for themselves and their families. College isn't preached. Trades aren't, pushed. Mm-hmm. It's the most important thing most of the time in the African-American community is just getting your diploma. That's the best achievement that most families push, mm-hmm. because historically, maybe your parents or your grandparents didn't even get the opportunity to graduate high school. So many situations where they may have dropped out when they were 13 because they had to get a job to help their parents put food on the table and take care of their siblings. So right. Financial stability is a main stressor in our community.
So considering all of these life stressors that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, what are some coping strategies that you'd recommend?
Believe it or not, I play video games as a stress reliever. It sounds crazy, but I play violent video games because I can't be violent in real life.
I respect it.
So I take a lot of anger or situations that I wish I could have handled in an old way, where now I have to handle it in a professional way, and I play video games to cope with that. I think family and support systems are great ways to cope. I would also throw in there therapy, because the mental health is coming to the forefront. And I think that if you want to participate in therapy, you should pursue it.
So we are coming to the conclusion of this interview. Before we end, are there any key takeaways you'd like to give our listeners before we go?
No one's going to take your mental health serious for you. You have to take it serious first yourself. You have to understand what you're going through, and you have to figure out an outlet to relieve your stress. If you need to, if your mental health is serious enough to where you think you need to see a psychiatrist, to maybe medicine is a solution, or even just some type of help, then that's something you explore.
Hello again, it's me, Tajay, the intern with Apple of His Eye, and today we are joined with
Ryan A. McDade. Dr. Ryan A.
Dr. Ryan A.
Yes.
McDade. Thank you for being with us today. So before we get started, can you please share a bit more background information about yourself?
Absolutely. So I am co-founder, I'm current president of Apple of His Eye. I consider myself a mental health advocate. I've been in the mental health space for almost 15 years now. It's personal for me because I have loved ones who have been diagnosed with persistent mental health conditions. And I also have my own bouts with anxiety. And so it's really personal for me on multiple levels. And I really enjoy the work that I do. I feel like it's a calling, that God called me to this work. And it's my goal to provide better culturally competent services, as well as just be a supportive voice for those that are dealing with mental health.
Thank you so much. So as you know, it is July and it is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. And especially since the COVID-19 pandemic, mental health has finally come to the forefront of a lot of conversations, especially in regards to marginalized groups such as African Americans. So in your own words, how do you perceive the stigma surrounding mental health in the African American community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I still feel like it's there. Now, I will say that within the past 20 years, we definitely made some upward movement and trends, as I do feel like there's a little bit of less stigma when you talk about mental health. Like you said, especially with COVID-19, people are prioritizing the issue of, work balance, life balance, and really just trying to make sure you're okay first.
Yes.
However, where I feel like there's still a large amount of stigma is when we get into the serious and persistent mental health conditions. And so some of those may include schizophrenia, major depressive disorder, borderline personality disorder. And so when we talk about those, I think the community would agree that these are a little bit more stigmatized. It's like, oh my God, what is that? You hear unsettling language like, oh my gosh, that person's really crazy. Something's wrong.
Yes.
And so I think we've normalized anxiety and even depression sometimes. So for me, what I would like to do is have the conversation enlarge itself to have more talk about these disorders that don't often get enough attention, and to really normalize those as well, and to take the stigma away from persons or families that may be dealing with these conditions.
Yes, thank you. That was a very insightful response. So moving on to a more broad subject, systemic racism. As you know, that is a very hefty topic. How do you feel that specifically impacts the mental health of the African American community?
That's a great question. I don't know who worked with you to create that question, but they did a really good job.
You're right.
On a more of a serious note, I feel like systemic racism, it's ingrained in people of color, especially for African Americans, since the day we were born. I feel like it's almost kind of like a fish growing up in water. You don't know you're living in water until someone takes you out.
Right.
And so for me, I can remember as early as going into the grocery store with my mom and being told, don't ask for nothing, don't yell, don't no fits in here, you stay close to me. And then I'm going in and I'm seeing kids that don't look like to me living their best life. They don't look nothing like me. And I'm like, well, why can't I have this freedom?
Right.
And so you grow up and you kind of see differences like that. And then as you become a young teen or an adult, you realize that, hey, there's this thing called racism, and it's impacting the way that I conduct myself so that I'm able to stay safe. And there's a double standard. People that are not Black, not African American, not from a minority group, there seems to be a little bit more leadway, but that doesn't apply to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, stresses, they are a daily part of our life. What would you recommend in regards to coping skills, in regards to dealing with all these stresses from day-to-day life?
What might work for me may or may not work for you.
Mm-hmm.
But for me personally, I would say therapy,
Yes.
Journaling,
Mm-hmm.
and self-talk.
Yes.
And I'm willing to elaborate on it if you want me to.
Please do.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
please do.
Okay, you kind of pulled it out. So I feel like in a world where everyone's voice is so easily accessible, right? Whether it's social media, the opinions of your friends, your family, sometimes your own voice can get lost in all of that.
Absolutely.
And so one of the coping mechanisms that I routinely utilize is taking time to talk with myself.
Yes.
I will go in the mirror and I will say, hey, Ryan A., what's going on with you today? And I will talk to myself, talk back to myself to really find out what is it that I think about me.
Right.
What is it that is, aligned with the word of God. I'm a woman of faith. I'm a Christian. So
Amen.
What belief systems am I supporting? Have I adopted? Whether or not they're true, but do they align with what I know God would say, nah, we're not rocking with that.
Yeah. Okay, so we are coming to the conclusion of this interview. Are there any additional takeaways, any other key elements that you'd like to give our listeners before we wrap it up?
I think for me, I just want everyone to know that you're not alone. If you're dealing with something that you perceive to be small or large and you don't really feel like you would be understood, I just want to say that there's individuals, there's organizations such as Apple of His Eye that are here to support you in whatever way that we can. I also want to advocate for people taking that time to find their inner voice to say, hey, this is how I'm feeling. I think you said it best, checking in with yourself. And so validating you, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes, as I said earlier, there's going to be a lot of other voices that don't necessarily support or understand where you're coming from. And so when you're not okay, it's okay to not be and take the steps you need to figure out what will work so that your mental health can improve.
Yes, thank you. It's okay to not be okay sometimes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate you so much for this interview.
Well, I appreciate you for interviewing me.
Yes, thanks for having